reason. All right. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the session of the K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series. The K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series is designed to help K-12 educators reimagine education with Blackboard's teaching and learning solutions. The K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series harnesses the power of our K-12 community of academic leaders, teachers, and other experts to provide relevant, real-time, on-demand, and ongoing professional development opportunities for K-12 educators. Colleen, I'm sorry, can you help me with the slides here? It's not, my computer is locked up.
There you go. Are you seeing slide 2? Or your moderator slide?
I'm not. Can everybody give us a green check if you see today's BITS team? I'm not able to see it. I just want to make sure everyone else can.
Like we're getting some green checks.
Oh, good. I'm not seeing the green checks either. It's completely frozen. So help me out here. Let me know when you're ready, when the next slide is up each time, okay? My name is Katie Gallagher, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Blackboard's Teaching and Learning Solutions and Products, and I serve as the moderator for the series. Thank you to Colleen Smith from our Central Marketing team, who will also be helping moderate and answer questions in the chat today. We'll be joining you this spring for the series, and we're always open to new ideas, so please let us know if you're interested in presenting a future session or you have a topic that you would like to see. You can move forward one.
Yep.
Each webinar in the series will be recorded, as you all know, so you can search for the K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series on the Blackboard TV YouTube channel or at tinyurl.com/bitsk12. You'll also be receiving the recording from today and presentation slides in a few days after the webinar by email. In addition, you'll receive an invitation to participate in an online professional learning community designed to augment the series and create an avenue for ongoing collaboration and dialogue. So please be sure to accept that invitation and participate in the new online PLC. So moving on to the upcoming schedule, as you can see, we will be having many exciting professional development sessions lined up this spring. Join us again on Monday for Be the Architect, Not the Builder with Paula Barr. She's a second grade blended learning teacher from Lawrence Public Schools. You can go to bbbb.blackboard.com/K12bits to register for Monday's session or any session within the series. If you haven't done so already, be sure to download the Blackboard K-12 Live app for more professional development on demand, anytime, anywhere, to get the best of Blackboard World from the summer. But every session in the series from last spring to last fall to this spring gets added to the app so you can access professional development on the go whenever you're ready for it. Today we're very pleased to welcome Jenny Day from the North Carolina Virtual Public School. She's going to take us through a teacher toolbox, reshaping assessment and feedback for online students. Assessment and feedback are the heart of the learning experience. In this session, she will discuss specific strategies for shaping assessment and feedback in the online environment to build strong teacher-student relationships, guide resource and learning path decisions, increase student metacognition, and provide tools for current and future learning within the content. She's been teaching science for 17 years and has 4 years of online teaching experience with NCVPS as a teacher and for the past year as an instructional leader. In addition to an amazing education in a rural North Carolina high school, she's a proud East Carolina University graduate, a nationally board certified and renewed in AYA in science, and achieved the AIG certification through an online program with the University of Virginia. So welcome to Jenny Day. We're very excited for her presentation today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I pass it over to Jenny. We like to keep the sessions as interactive as possible, so please use the chat. Don't hesitate to do so. Also, you can *6 to unmute your phone line if you've dialed in through the conference bridge, or use your talk button. But if you're not currently speaking or don't have a question to ask or something to add, if you could keep your phone on mute or the talk button unpressed so that we can have high clarity in our recording. So thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thank you to Jenny. I'll pass it over to you. And Colleen, just a heads up, I'm going to try to shut the window down and log back in if you could re-promote me when I come back in. Thanks so much, everyone.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you to all of you for coming today. I am super excited to talk with you. As you heard, I have been an online teacher for several years now, and before that was a face-to-face teacher. So I've had the pleasure of seeing teaching evolve through both of those mediums, both face-to-face and in the online forums. How many of you, if you could give me a check mark, are current online teachers, whether you are only teaching online or just part of the day? Oh, excellent. So several of you. And I'm going to clear that out. And how many of you are currently only teaching in a face-to-face brick-and-mortar school? If you could give me a green check if that describes you. Okay, well, that's perfect. What we are going to talk about today is something I think can easily apply to both teaching in a brick-and-mortar school and teaching online, because at the end of the day, what I've come to realize is that good teaching is good teaching. And while we may have a few additional tricks or tips that are specific to online learning, nothing that I talk about today couldn't translate to a classroom to help instruction there. We are going to talk about two sides of the same coin. We're going to talk about formative assessments, and we're going to talk about feedback. And the reason that I say that these are two sides of the same coin is because what I've come to realize in 17 years of teaching is that teaching, good, effective teaching, is really about having a good, effective conversation. Give me a green check if you think you might agree that conversation is key to teaching and learning. Okay, well, most of us then seem to be on the same page. I cannot express to you how, when I first began teaching, surprised I was that I didn't necessarily relate to all of the students in my class. Perhaps you can share this experience with me, but when I first started teaching, I kind of had the idea that all of the students in class were going to be like I was in class. And I don't know why I had that idea, complete misconception, but I had no idea that when I stepped into a classroom, I was going to be faced with students who actually didn't want to be there. It was such a surprise to me. I don't know if any of you have ever felt that same way, but over the course of time, I quickly began to realize that at the heart of every student was a desire to have a conversation, and that sometimes I had to start that conversation on a different page than my content. Sometimes that conversation didn't need to start out, I'm a science teacher, didn't need to start with biology or chemistry. It needed to start somewhere else. But once the conversation got going, I could translate that to my content. And so over the years, what I began to hone was the techniques that I used to continue the conversation in a way that was content-driven, but student-friendly. So today, that's kind of my focus here, sharing with you what I've learned from other people about how to use formative assessments, which is a pretty new term for something that probably most of us who've been teaching a while have done, and feedback to keep the conversation with students going, and to make sure that that conversation is effective for learning. And this has become particularly important in online learning. Can anyone suggest in the chat one reason why in online learning conversation with a student is even more important than in face-to-face? Just type in the chat if you can think of one reason why online learning relies, that's exactly right. They are lonely, you're right. That's exactly right. You don't have body language to read. There's no face-to-face interaction. When a student would walk into my class, even if I didn't have time to sit down and have a 30-minute conversation, based on me, I saw them. I could see if they were having a good day or a bad day just by reading their face. I knew from the conversations between classes what was going on. And in online, we don't have that. But what we do have in online learning that is such an advantage is we have the ability to use technology in a way different than we might use it in a face-to-face classroom. And we have the ability, because we are not monitoring the student discipline in the classroom, we have the ability to really use that conversation to be just about the work and not always about the behavior. Not always true. I've had to have conversations about behavior with online students for sure. And as someone has just mentioned in the chat, you're absolutely right. Asynchronous, the bit of delay does allow us to put a little more thought sometimes and to personalize, individualize what we're going to talk about. So let's start with the first side of the coin, which is formative assessment. I've left this slide up here for a few minutes so you can read through it. The strategy that can double student gains is formative assessment. That to me is pretty exciting. The idea that one technique built throughout my instruction has that much power. And so what we need to do, though, before we move on is really decide when we talk about formative assessment what we mean, because there are lots of different definitions, lots of them. So what we are going to be talking about, our definition is that we are going to look at formative assessment as an assessment that forms a new path of instruction. It's an assessment that forms a new path of instruction. So I made a little visual because my students are often visually stimulated in ways that maybe they don't get when I'm just talking to them, and maybe you are that way as well, to organize what a formative assessment is or isn't. Can anybody tell me what this particular graphic organizer is? I bet all of you educators know it right away. It is the beautiful, wonderful, starts with an F, Freyer model. I don't know if you've used this in class, but I'm a big advocate for graphic organizers. And I felt like putting this one here is a way to kind of demonstrate to you how powerful it can be. The definition of a formative assessment we just talked about, it can be formal or informal. It is diagnostic, and it determines the next step. So here's some characteristics we're going to talk about. A formative assessment should provide specific feedback, reveal strengths, reveal gaps, inform our next step, and be quick and immediate. Given you lots of examples, which we'll come back to later, and here are some non-examples. And the one I want to focus in on here is that the guest tastes the soup, and I want you to compare that to the example of the chef tasting the soup. So let that settle in for just a second. Think about the difference there. The chef tastes the soup in a formative. In a non-formative, the guest tastes the soup. So when you provide a guest in your home with a nice bowl of soup, what do you no longer have time to do if it doesn't taste good? That's right. So that's really at the heart of this. Think another one. That's right. You don't have time. Although you could, you're absolutely right, add some more hot sauce there on the fly, but we are limited by time and scope at that point in what we can do to adjust our direction. Formative assessments are about the chef tasting the soup. And of course, in this particular analogy, the chef is both teacher and student. And I don't want to lose sight of that. It's not just the teacher who is the chef, okay? We are going to, try to really build up metacognition in our students through formative assessments. So here's an example. Don't you love going to professional development where they talk a lot about something that they never actually use in that professional development? And I determined at the start of this that I was not going to do that because I have been sitting in that chair far too often. Using the UpVote, the little voting function that we've used a couple of times, UpVote, if you feel like you can now explain how a formative assessment is different than a summative assessment. Oh, I see hand raised. Is that an actual question there, Jen, or were you upvoting? Oh, very good. Okay. And feel free. I see some approving, some upvotes. Very good. Okay. And downvote or choose the X if you're not sure how a formative is different from a summative. And if you're not sure, there's a little video link there that you can quickly go to, and it's a very short video, but it's a great one. And I'm going to put it over here in the chat for you if you choose. If you downvote it, if you're still not sure how formative is different than summative, you can go and watch that video, and it'll take about 2 minutes. But if you upvoted, I have a challenge for you now. I'd like you to type into the chat either a limitation or a challenge that you either have experienced or that you imagine you might experience using a formative assessment. And there are tons of them. So I'm going to get quiet for just a minute or so and let you type into the chat a limitation or a challenge that you feel like formative assessments have. I love these. Y'all are coming up with some incredible examples of challenges and limitations, and all of these are incredibly valid, all of them. So time I'm seeing again and again, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Test anxiety, love that. I think we'll address that in a little bit. And not reflective of what was taught because the teacher might not have created it. I feel like, Marie, that you might be coming from a district or a system that promotes a lot of common assessments. So I definitely have heard that concern and felt that concern before. Excellent. All right, well, let's jump into it then. Let's address these. Let's start with, are formative assessments really necessary? And two of the biggest and most common practical concerns in teaching is time, which many of you have just mentioned, and the diverse needs of learners. So to start thinking about this, I want you to think about two travelers that are both asked to get to the same place. They're starting at different places. We give one a GPS, something like they might have on their phone or a TomTom, something like that. And then the other is given a map with a single route. Which one of those do you feel is more similar to the use of a formative assessment? The GPS or the map? Just type it into your chat. Do you think the GPS is similar to formative assessment or the map? Getting a lot of map. All right. Well, we're going to come back to this question. I'm going to leave you hanging for just a minute, and we're going to talk about this in the context of formative assessments and how formative assessments might be more like one or the other. So let's play a game. We are going to play a game that I like to call pro versus con. So I'm going to give you some research that is pro and some concerns. Pro, since the late 1990s, this particular reform group has gotten a lot of attention regarding the effectiveness of formative assessments and concluded that formative assessment practices typically yield gains equivalent to 1 or 2 grade levels in learning. 1 or 2 grade levels for gains. Now here's the common concern. I don't have any additional time to build in anything else or do anything about the information. So let's address this concern. So we've got this big pro over here, now we've got this concern. And I can't just let the concern hang, I'm going to address it. Here's some notes before you decide what's one here, the big pro or the con. Here's some notes. Formative assessments, by definition, by our specific definition, happen in class and they are quick, okay? And to prove that that's just not me speaking, I've put a little research into this. And here we have a quote directly from the research that you see linked there from the teaching channel. Formative assessments can help you spend your class time wisely. If you take the data and you analyze it, and this becomes part of your practice, then you can have students focus on parts they don't understand or do reliably, instead of having everyone moving through the same gaps in learning. Okay, so no wrong answer here. Which do you think won on this page, pro or con? Do you think that the pro outweighs the con, or do you think the con outweighs the pro? I promise I will not judge you either way. All right, lots of pros. Okay, excellent. So let's come back to our map example here. Imagine 2 traveling groups. Both have a guide that are very knowledgeable. So we're back to the maps. Both have a guide that is very knowledgeable. So I'm not talking about teacher differences here. The guide is knowledgeable with the terrain. For us, that would be the content. Both have travelers with lots of different needs. Some are inexperienced travelers, some maybe not as in shape as others. Both have to get to a certain place at a certain time. So it's just like in our classrooms where we're told we have to get through this material by day X. The one guide who is accustomed to the needs, an experienced guide, already kind of knows how this is going to play out in their mind. So they've plotted a course. This course they know will get them where they need to be on time. Their group stays together. Their group follows the course. Now along the way, the guide has come up with lots of wonderful stories and pictures to help flesh out the experience. They make it to the festival on time. Do you feel like this represents the use of formative assessments? Yes or no? Check or X? No. Okay. You're right. You're right. It doesn't. And this is who I was as a teacher for a long time. I knew how to get my kids where they needed to be. I knew how to prepare my kids, the most of them, for the test. And I was okay with sacrificing some of the side trips for my more experience. Now, maybe I am alone in that experience. Maybe I am. Have any of you ever been in that same place where you had your map, you had your path, you knew how to get them there, you knew how to be successful as it had been explained to you, and you were comfortable in that journey, and you felt like you were a really good guide, giving them these other experiences through stories and images? Has anybody else been there? I see one person who's joined with me. So if you've been there, you understand that. And I'm not saying that that's a terrible thing. But let's look at the other option. The second guide has a different approach because there are pros and cons to both of these. She talks with the travelers as they go. Remember I said it's about conversation. She sends some of them on ahead. Now this takes trust and this takes skill because in order to allow yourself to let some kids go down a different path than others, it's a scary thing, or at least it was for me. But I am a self-confessed control freak. So that was super scary for me at first. She lets some of them go ahead. She's not necessarily right there with them, guiding every part of it, but she's sent them to a place. She's plotted that out for them. Sometimes she allows another part of the group to linger in one place to catch their breath. And based on her decisions as she goes, adjusting as she goes, the group's not always in one location. She's always the facilitator. They're not in one location. This represents more, absolutely, Sonia, what formative assessment is about. So think back to the GPS. What does a GPS do that a map doesn't? If I go past my turn, what does the GPS do? That's right, it adjusts. It says, plotting a new direction, recalculating. That's right. Some of you have been like me and just went right past that street where I was supposed to go. The map that has one specific path, if everything is clear on that path, it is a valuable tool. It is a simple tool. And for many people, that tool may work better because that's all they can do right then, right now. I'm not judging that at all. I was there for a long time. I had my map. I had my plot. I was incredibly successful at getting kids to where they needed to be to do what they needed to do on a test. However, what I've come to understand is that being willing to make those adjustments based on skill, based on time, based on trial and error, and there will be some failures, and that's okay, that the trip is more enjoyable and more full for everyone, for all of my students. Not just for the most of them, but for everyone. It took me giving up a little control. It took me building it intentionally and thoughtfully, places where I can make adjustments, places where I can talk to students, and I don't always mean sit down and talk with them. I mean using formative assessments to continue that conversation. So that's right. So somebody just put GPS also offers different routes and means to get to the same location. So it's not just the same path. And I'm not saying just going down one path is always a bad thing. I'm just offering how formative assessment looks a little different. So what are the pros and cons? We just talked about some of those. If you don't mind sharing with us, where do you see yourself today? How many of you see yourself as the one route teacher today? And how many of you see yourself as a GPS teacher today? How many of you are the one route, and how many of you are the GPS? I have no doubt that all of you are getting your kids where they need to be. Okay, we've got two that say they feel pretty confident that today they're working with a GPS. Anybody else brave? It's okay. If you don't want to chime in, that's fine too. How does I hope that I am too, and I'm sure that there are days, as Kathleen just said, that I'm probably more one route, and certain classes where I have to adjust some of that. Formative assessment, as I think that most of you are seeing, lends itself to more individualized learning. And because when you're making the adjustments, then you can begin to make those adjustments on a more specific level. And I bet it does drive teacher candidates nuts. I bet it does. And you know, I'm going to say, and I might be going out on a limb here, but I really do think that sometimes for teachers that may not have the confidence and the skill set yet to go down all of those paths, who have explored all of those paths, that the one route can be sometimes very effective for them. And I don't want to take away from that, because I think we do that too often in education and say there's just one way. I'm just saying that if you have experience, or if you have the flexibility of mind to work with multiple adjustments, that what you will find is that using formative assessments as a conversation with the kids, getting them into, did I understand it, did I not, making those adjustments can be incredibly rewarding and powerful. All right. Do you feel like you understand at this point the purpose, the benefits, and the limitations? If so, I want you to stop for just a second, and I want you to think of an example of a formative assessment that you use, or one that you are planning to use in the next week. And if you don't mind, you don't have to type in lots of details, but if you could just briefly put into the chat a formative assessment, what kind is it? What does that look like? Is it a quiz? Is it a think, pair, share? What are you right now considering that you use as a formative assessment, or that you plan to use and that you consider a formative assessment? If right now you're thinking, I don't think I understand the purpose and the benefits, here is another video that goes through exactly that. You don't have to watch it now, of course, but if you would like, then you can certainly take it's just a very short one, a few minutes, and I'm going to pop it into the chat for those of you who feel like you might benefit from that, and it's there on the screen as well. All right, so we see Venn diagram, discussion-based assessments, very good, great examples. Anybody else want to share a formative assessment that they're currently using? Quizzes, okay. Discussion posts for hot questions. Excellent. Okay, we have a project with multiple parts, so I'm getting in some room to adjust. KWL. Well, y'all have some great examples. Hopefully I can give you a few more to add to your toolbox, but definitely love that you're sharing these, and we can all think about how these might work. Our focus is to design and intentionally implement. To design it and intentionally implement. And somebody said earlier, formative assessments may not work if you're not the one who designed them. And unless you're doing every part of your lesson, or you're able to take that formative assessment and break it into what you need, I think that that's a very valid point. I do think that they can work better if they are very specific to a lesson. Now, there are some generalities that can go. So a good formative assessment should be able to work for multiple teachers, but maybe not every teacher. Because as we're making some of those adjustments, things will change. But here are the key points when you're designing one, or when you're looking at one that's been designed and you're saying, is this a good formative assessment, or do I need to go back and say, this formative assessment is not the best, can we change it in ways X, Y, Z? Keep it quick. A formative assessment is never the point of a lesson. If you are spending 45 minutes of your 60 minutes, or 85 minutes of your 90 minutes doing the formative assessment, it is no longer the formative assessment. Keep it functional as part of the lesson. I remember many times that I have learned over the years, if it is not functional, I won't use it. If it's not functional, if it takes too long, if it's too difficult to implement, it's not going to get full use. So keep it functional. Build in immediate feedback. Remember that this is supposed to be a conversation, and if there's not immediate feedback, then it's somebody shouting in a room and no one answering back. So building in immediate feedback is key for a formative assessment. Also remember that it's a tool. all of these great examples that y'all have posted work in different situations. The specifics have to work for three things: you, the student, and the lesson. And you need to evaluate each of those. Does this work for me? Does this work for the student? And does this work for the lesson? So here are some 4 quick planning questions that should help you figure that out. First question you have to ask yourself is, where in this lesson will a formative help me? And formatives, because they are quick, can happen multiple times in a single lesson. For example, I love case studies. Love to use case studies. Anybody else out there use case studies? Give me a check if you use a case study in your classroom. Very good. So a few of you at least using case studies. And sometimes what I would do is I would plant a formative assessment after the introduction, because some of my kids had prior knowledge that they're bringing to the table, and then I would plant it after the main part of the instruction, and I would compare the two to see. Now remember, formative should change our direction. So the first one maybe is acting more like a pretest there and less like a formative. But by building in that little component, it allowed the second formative assessment to be more descriptive to me. Also ask yourself, how complex does the formative question need to be? How complex does the formative assessment need to be? Is it just a pulse check, or do you need to have specific tiers that you can play off of? How detailed does the feedback need to be? Is this a micro remediation where you can quickly provide a practice set or a link, or, because we're talking about online learning in particular, a short video or an edu-creation? Or is this something that needs to actually go down a different path? So if I have a very weak math student, do I need to give them a completely different assignment from my strong math student in chemistry? And what tool will work best to deliver the formative and the feedback? As an online teacher, I have lots of tools at my disposal, and we have some of those same tools in the classroom. All right, here is our game number 2, pro versus con. And here the pro is that formative assessments properly employed in the classroom will help students learn what's being taught to a better degree. And they looked at a whole bunch of research and a meta-analysis here, and they concluded that student gains in learning triggered by the formative assessment are amongst the largest ever reported for any educational intervention. Here is another common concern. Students will not be honest on the formative, and so the data will not be valid. People are often concerned that their students, because they think that if they do poorly, they might get an easier lesson, will be less honest. And this brings me to some notes here we see as last notes. Formative assessments, in the minds of most, should not be graded. They should not be graded. And that decreases the motivation to cheat. So keeping them quick is another way to demotivate them to start to lie or cheat on that process. And as the students begin to realize, hey, I'm learning more about my learning and take ownership of that, then research has shown, and you see here quoted by Moss and Brookhart, that it has strongly been linked to increased intrinsic student motivation. When used effectively, formative assessment is sensitive to the role of motivation in learning. So, which do you think won, pro or con? Type it in there for me. Do you think that the pro of this is the largest ever reported educational intervention, or the con that they may not be honest? I know I'm stacking the deck every time. You sweet people who keep putting pro are probably thinking these are hardly fair. But that is sometimes what we do as teachers. We stack the deck. So let's get into some examples for your toolbox. Now that you've learned a little bit about how to design, or at least thought about that for a bit, here are some examples from me. And I put these into a pictograph because I just love those. And they always help me to kind of see what's before me. And I have a link there to the Pictochart, and I put it in the chat for you as well. Here are some common examples. The UpVote, which we've used already, the chat, where the students spend 30 seconds discussing the concept, and of course you would be circulating and listening, or you can have students online can use things like VoiceThread. How many of you have ever used VoiceThread? Anybody? If you've used it, if you just want to click yes or give a shout out if you loved it. They can chat about the concept and you can listen to what they're saying. Doesn't always have to be chatting with each other. Show me. This is where I have students quickly find and post a picture that provides an example or exemplifies a concept. And it has to be quick, so you know, I'm not asking them to draw it, I'm just asking them to find one. Again, we're talking about online students, so this is a little bit easier for them. Map it, where you create a starter map. I'll give you an example of this in just a second. Question it, where they have to come up with a question related to the concept. I learned so much from the questions that my students ask. I'm sure you do too. Pin it with a leveled path. A pulse quiz, which is kind of the standard little quick quiz that you get a pulse and you can differentiate. A hashtag, which is just a fun way to get them thinking about a phrase that describes what they've just learned. And grade recon, which is where we use rubrics. And somebody mentioned bad rubrics as a limitation, and I agreed that this one would only be as strong as the rubric. Now, on the link that I put up there, I have matched each of these with specific Web 2.0 tools that you can use to easily implement these in an online or face-to-face class if you have access to that technology. So feel free to go there and look at that. And here is an example of a path or a map even. Use the drawing tools if you have access to those, and I don't know if you have access to those if you are not a moderator, but if you do, you can choose the pen stroke over there if you would like. And type, or if you can't, type in the number to the chat. I always have to have a plan B that best describes where you currently feel that you stand in learning about designing and implementing formative assessments. 1, not for me. Totally fine if it's not. 2, maybe you need more information. 3, yes, you're still not quite sure how. 4, a solid yes, and 5, already there. Been doing this, you feel completely comfortable. All right, again, 3s, 4s. Excellent. 3s, 4s. Great. If you are at a 3 or below, I've got some great articles for you that get down to some brass tacks. And I also will be stopping at 4:15 for questions, and we can talk about those. I hope that you can see, even in this presentation, how some of that is built in, where there are moments where we pause, check for understanding. If you didn't understand, you're offered an alternative. If you did understand, you're offered a challenge and extension that then everyone can partake in. So that is a quick and easy way. The downside is that you're not in control. I don't know if you went and watched that video. I don't know if you did. So part of it is I have to teach my students that what we're doing is relevant, and I have to make sure that I'm convinced of that as well, so that they are more likely to go and do it, to take ownership of that learning. If you're at a 4 or a 5, then the next slide will provide some more examples, some sources rather of those examples, and I would love to hear from you about what you're doing, because I like to add to my toolbox as well. So here's some great examples. The first one up here, the Edutopia link, has multiple quick examples to choose from. I think there were 50-some on that page. Just loved, loved, loved that article. Lots of great quick ideas for formative assessments. You don't have to just do a quiz. And then the second one there is specific to technology that you can use. So the first one is more the shape, the design, and the second is more the technology, the delivery for the formative assessment. And there in the chat are the 2 links for you. All right, I am going to move to the let's play a game one more time. I wanted to get this research to you, but didn't want to have it all on one big slide. This describes some study that they did where they randomly assigned 33 teachers to different groups, and one used more instructional adjustments, relying on informal classroom observations. In classrooms where medium and short cycle formatives were used, teachers were happier, greater professional satisfaction. I'm hoping that all of you right now are thinking, I would love to have greater professional satisfaction. Can you ever have too much? So this is something that if you introduce into your practice can really lead to you feeling better about teaching, getting more professional satisfaction. But I hear those of you who might be thinking, look, this is just the latest bandwagon. I already do this. I don't need to intentionally, deliberately plan out my formative assessment. Now, formative assessments can be a lot of things, and you probably are already doing them even if you've never called them that or thought about them as a strategy. But you have to also remember that this is not some pre-packaged, here, throw a quiz every 5 minutes, it's going to work great. It is a philosophy of teaching. And there are, as we talked about, those 4 planning questions that you can think about to make it even better. It's not about adding something that was never there. It's about taking what was there and making it a little more intentional and making it so that you're able to guide students a little bit better and make those adjustments like the GPS. Who won, pro or con? Oh, waiting for the types. Still thinking it over. Excellent. Thank you. So sweet of you to participate. I just love seeing things going in the chats. All right, but we're not done quite yet. Was the formative assessment effective? After you're done with it, you have to decide, did it work for me? Did it work for the student? Did it work for the lesson? Did the lesson get better? Just subjectively, did it feel like it went better? Did you feel like students got more out of it? And then objectively, when you get to the summative assessment, are the students achieving better? If it didn't allow you to tighten your instruction, if it didn't help to lead to micro-remediation or to a completely different learning path, if you found it too long or too tricky or whatever, then I hope that wherever it is that you teach, that you are given the opportunity to change it, because it's all about being growth-minded, trial and error. But as part of whether it worked, we have to look at the feedback you're providing, whether it's on a formative or an assignment. And here's where I get really passionate. Feedback is part of that continuous conversation. So the formative assessment, in a sense, is the question part of the conversation. We are asking for information and responding to what is given. Feedback is where the student is providing the stem of that. They are giving us something to look at and we are responding to them. 2 sides of the same coin. I can tell you right now that my strongest memories as a student were when I received good feedback. I don't know if any of you have had that same experience. Have any of you ever worked on a paper for a long time and what you got back was a single grade or a single comment and you felt so disappointed? You maybe even thought, did my teacher look at this? I don't know what was right. I don't know what was wrong. And that letdown, that feeling of disappointment is because we crave feedback. We want to know what's good and what's bad. So here's some research that you can see that feedback works. Meta-analysis again, feedback ranked among the highest of hundreds of education practices studied in terms of their ability to make a difference. But not all feedback is good feedback. So what is and what isn't? Good feedback links back to the learning objective. It is specific to what is being learned in that lesson or in that assignment. This can help students to develop a learning orientation as opposed to a performance orientation. Good feedback is very specific. It is not good job. It is not this was great. It is something that tells them exactly what was good, what was great. Vague feedback can have negative effects. So we want to steer away from that. We don't want to give them a blanket statement. And teaching with NCVPS, they have really trained us to be specific in our feedback, and it has made an incredible difference. And good feedback is timely. If it's a new concept, it's pretty much right away. So here are a couple of examples that I took from my class. In the first one, you can see there for Ben, I pulled out something that Ben wrote in the lab. Now, all of this is being typed into a little feedback box that Ben can see later. And then I talk about what he wrote. Would, since you've said this here, would that gold sink or not in a liquid with density that was less than gold? I mentioned that I was curious about something. I gave an everyday example. So I'm trying to build into this a specific. I'm trying to build into this what they're learning about so that they could look at that feedback separate from the assignment and still get something out of it. And then another feedback here talking about nuclear equations. Built in the real world example of living near a nuclear power plant, which we do here in this area. And talking about giving a link to some recent research to keep that real. All right, that is it for me. I'm ending at my 45-minute mark for questions. And here's some information about me, and here are some links to some of the articles that I used as references in this presentation. So I will stop for any questions.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, for the group, continue to ask questions in the chat or use your talk button or star 6. Rose, I can answer that question. Yes, I'll be sending a PDF of the presentation within a week with the recording. So yes, the presentation will be available on the recording of the presentation. Any other questions from the group? Lots of great feedback in the chat, Jenny. All right. Well, we're waiting for some more questions to come in. Jenny, thank you for a great session. Okay, here is a question before we move to the final one. Michelle is asking, she's struggling with how to do this with a flex asynchronous online class. So Jenny, would you have any feedback for a flex asynchronous online situation?
Of course. Now, Michelle, can I ask you, are you doing via email or are you built into an LMS? Okay, perfect. So what I often do, because my class is somewhat flexible, maybe not to the degree of which you're referring, and it is asynchronous. We never have to be there at the same time, and it's online. So that's what I teach. And I build a lot of my formatives. We have what's called a daily announcement, which is really where the students start for that day. And I set out pacing guides for my students. So I name my daily announcement with the content that we're looking at. And when they start at okay, so everyone's in different spots. So if you have a way, whether it's a forum in Blackboard, well, I guess y'all call discussion boards, isn't that right, for Blackboard? If you have a way to kind of, and I don't know how much control you have over your curriculum with your online school, you may have very little. And so I'm going to give you that worst case scenario. If you don't have a lot of control, then my first suggestion would be to set up something like a discussion board where you can key in a formative assessment or, a small micro remediation is what I call them. And then as you're giving kids feedback on their work, wherever their work may be, that's where I would deliver the formative assessment or direct them to that formative assessment or offer them that feedback that gives them the next step. So your formative assessment is really going to become part of your feedback, which is much in the way that I do it as well. And we have built-in formative assessments to our lesson. So the students start with the presentations and then they work into practice, which we have a formative assessment between those two components. So if you're able to talk to your curriculum designer, if you have any control over curriculum design, then you can pop that link or whatever you're building in Blackboard and the tools that they have there. You can build that in right between where the student would go from one to the other. Does that answer your question? And I think Angie's directing this to you about adaptive release, or was that directed toward me? Okay. Yeah, and I love using adaptive release in my class. We usually set it up for more flexible pacing, so as students are moving from one module to the next. But I think that using adaptive release based on formative assessments can be a really strong strategy, as long as in that adaptive release you are opening up some sort of remediation if they are not progressing, so that you can actually direct the path of learning. And it's wonderful. Yes, I love adaptive release.
Lots of great questions coming in. I'm going to go ahead, and while we're waiting for more questions to come in, Jenny, I'm going to move ahead to just my last couple of slides to close out in case There are no more, but not to discourage additional questions in the chat or verbally. But just a reminder, if you haven't already downloaded the BBK12 Live app, this session and all the sessions in the series will be added to the app for on-demand professional development. Angie, there are a couple sessions this spring on achievement, so those might be helpful as well to combine a couple concepts. This has been a great session today, and we hope you all can join us on Monday with Paula Barr on being an architect, not the builder, for learning. She's a second grade blended teacher in Lawrence Public Schools. Jenny, can't thank you enough for such a great and interactive session today. It was really awesome. And again, for everyone, don't stop with the questions. Keep them feeding in. We've got 10 more minutes. Just want to close out for those who are ready to have some time back in the day. Thanks, everyone.
This call is no longer being recorded.